Joined FM Global as the head of delivery services, which includes the Agile Chapter, change management, business process improvement, project management, and performance metrics. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Hang on, I'm going to share my screen here. And it should be noted, I have a lot of colleagues on the phone tonight, including Sue is a colleague of mine. So thank you guys for inviting me. And I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, the cognitive barriers to continuous improvement, but hopefully you guys will find it interesting and won't fall asleep in the third hour of my discussion here. But basically, I created this about a year ago when I was at MassMutual, and I delivered it at a lean conference. I tweaked it a little bit for this circumstance, but basically how I kind of came upon this topic was when we were still commuting to the office, I would always listen to podcasts and books on tape, and kind of my focus was primarily on psychology and behavioral economics. And so there's a lot of things about decision making and behavior, and then I would get to work, and we're always thinking about behavior at work. We're thinking about ideal behaviors, leader behaviors, motivation, culture. And so I would always get these like little tidbits from these podcasts and books on tape that I would listen to. And I was always intrigued by how can we kind of put those two things together. And the thing that intrigued me the most was the notion of cognitive bias, which I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a minute. But I just found those to be fascinating. And I thought it'd be really interesting to think about all the things that kind of get in the way of us getting better, and how can we think about those in the context of cognitive bias. So, all right, let's see if I can get my screen to, there we go. All right, can everybody see my screen all right?
Yes.
All right, and just in terms of kind of procedurally here, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them whenever. Can certainly be a dialogue. There's a couple times when I'll be asking for some participation from the group, but there's only a couple circumstances, so feel free to just ask questions throughout, and obviously we can have some time to talk about it at the end as well. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those behaviors that get in the way of improvement. How can we think about those in the context of cognitive bias? And I'll talk about what that is in a second. And then what are some of the things that we can do to raise awareness about these biases? And as we all know, bias is not something you can get rid of. It's kind of in our human nature. It's the way that we think and the way that our brain operates. But you can raise awareness about it, and you can try and correct against bias in a number of ways. So I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. All right, so I love this slide because I think it kind of totally encapsulates what I'm trying to capture in this section, which is we live obviously in an extremely complex world, and we have information coming at us from every single direction all times of the day. And we have to take all that information in, and we have to think about how do we synthesize that, and how do we make decisions based upon that information. And obviously, that can be very difficult, but our brain has ways of simplifying and helping us to make those decisions. And one of the theories in economics about how we make decisions is called rational choice theory. And it's essentially an economic principle that assumes that as individuals, we always make prudent and logical decisions that provide us with the highest amount of personal utility. So essentially, when we make decisions, and you can think about this on average as humans, if we believe in rational choice theory, we're making decisions that are in our own personal best interest the majority of the time. And it's a fundamental underpinning of microeconomics. And so if you look at microeconomic models or you study economics, this is something that you definitely have run into. It certainly comes up in psychology as well. But basically, the idea is that we take all this information in, there's this little algorithm in our head that kind of goes around, and what comes out is what's best for us personally, okay? So in the 70s, early 70s, there's a couple psychologists who started to ask a couple questions about this. And they said, they're two guys, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, and they were lifelong research partners and very influential in this field. And they started asking this question, like, is that really true that, in general, we're always making decisions that are in our own best interest? And they started to do some experiments and studies and research to see if they could find ways in which that isn't true. And I think they kind of intuitively knew that sometimes we don't make good decisions. And what they started to find was that there was a number of replicable ways in which human judgment and decisions differ from rational choice theory. And so they kind of put that on the map. And the term that they coined for that was a cognitive bias. And they explained it in terms of heuristics. And heuristic essentially, if you boil it down, it's basically a mental shortcut that provides us kind of an easy way to take in information and make decisions. It's kind of a mental model that we use by how we look at the world. And heuristics are great because it allows us to simplify things and make decisions, but they can also be bad because they can introduce some pretty systematic and severe errors in the way that we think about things. And so what I have up here on the screen is just a little bit of the popular kind of literature around cognitive bias and around decision making and human behavior in general. So FREAKONOMICS, you guys might know that's a kind of a popular one that has a lot of behavioral economics sprinkled in there. Nudge was very influential, particularly in the public sector. And I think maybe during the Obama administration, they actually had a department that was named, it was named after Nudge, where they used a lot of these principles about decision making and how do you kind of get people to make good decisions when you're creating public policy. How do you take into consideration human behavior? And then Hidden Brain here is, if you guys are interested in podcasts, that's a fantastic podcast that talks about psychology and human behavior. And then the one that I kind of like the best is, I'm pointing over to my screen on the other, my other screen here, so you guys can't see where I'm pointing, but just pretend you can. But Predictably Irrational, I think, is the best one, which is, that kind of describes exactly what we're talking about, by Dan Ariely, who's fantastic. And it basically, it's, the idea is that as humans, we can predict when people are going to be irrational and make bad decisions, which is kind of interesting. And that's a little bit what we're gonna talk about throughout the rest of the conversation. All right. So I have an example here. So I want everybody to answer this question in your head, and then I'll ask if anybody wants to kind of pipe in here, okay? So Linda is 31 years old. She is single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy, and as a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Okay, so which is more probable? That Linda is a bank teller, or that Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? So just think about that in your head for a second. And then anybody have a thought? We usually, if we were in an audience, we would do like everybody raise their hand. Everybody would kind of be like, number one, but Barbara, do you want to say something?
I would say the latter, right? I mean, okay. It's set up for you to assume the latter.
Definitely is set up for you to assume the latter. That is absolutely right. Anybody else?
I'm going to say just the bank teller, because if she, as a student, it specifically says as a student, and now she's 31, I'm going to assume she was a student in her late teens, early 20s.
All right. Okay. So
I'm going to guess that she's just a bank teller, because of the way that you have laid out the two together. The latter, the active in the feminist movement, would be something that you might assume in general, but either way, the way you word it is that she needs to be a bank teller. So I would say I would choose just the first one, because the second one would be a subset of the first one.
Yeah, that's Yep, that's a great way to think about it. Yep. Anybody else before I reveal?
I think you bring your own sort of history and thoughts. You know, if somebody's an activist, are they also a feminist? So do you tie those two together? I mean, social justice and feminism, I would say, are almost synonymous, but yeah.
Yep, no, that's absolutely right. So this is from an actual research study that Tversky and Kahneman, the two psychologists that I mentioned at the beginning, did. And so if you just think about it for a second, so the question is, which is more probable? Okay, so we're talking probable, which is kind of a mathematical way of thinking about things. Probability, there's no way for number 2 to be more likely than number 1, because number 1 only has a single qualifier. Number 2 has 2 qualifiers, and we're just guessing that there's a relationship there. I think, Doug, to your point, and I couldn't see who else was talking, but the person before that, the point that you were making. So in 1983, they did this study, and they asked a number of people. 85% of people responded number 2. Okay, and this is called the conjunction fallacy. And basically, what it says is that as humans, we're really bad at thinking about things in terms of probability, in terms of like mathematical probability. And what we look for is a resemblance between cause and effect. We're looking for relationships, more subjective relationships. And I heard a lot of like analysis about like, well, if we look at this and we think about, so you're looking for that relationship, and that's what we look for as humans, and that's what our brain looks for. Our brain does not look for mathematical probability, so we're very bad at understanding things in terms of probability. And it kind of, for me, it reminds me of, for anybody who's a statistician, correlation does not mean causation, because we always, when we see a correlation, we want things to have a relationship together, but it doesn't mean that they have a causal relationship to one another. So anyway, that's just an example of one cognitive bias, and that's called the conjunction fallacy. All right. Okay. So let's get into some of our examples about continuous improvement. So when I was originally creating this, I was working, we were working in value streams, and I was thinking about value streams and how do we improve across systems, basically across large processes that cross a number of different parts of a company. And so I kind of created this in the context of value stream improvement. And as we go through, I have 4 examples of different cognitive biases and how they apply to a work setting. And the way that I thought about it was in the context of, if we're working on kind of improving a system, what are some of those things that we need to take into consideration that maybe get in the way of that improvement effort? All right, before I go forward, anybody have any questions before I do our first example? I've thrown a lot at you here already. All right. So number 1 is something called the availability heuristic. And basically, what the availability heuristic is it's a mental shortcut that we use when we're evaluating something. So what we do is we rely on the most immediately available information that's in front of us. And that takes kind of becomes more present than other things. We overestimate the likelihood of whatever is in front of us. So like the classic example of this is the shark attack on television. So if you see a shark attack on television, and then someone asks you, how likely is it that you're going to be attacked by a shark? You're going to way overweight the likelihood and the probability of being attacked by a shark versus what the actual probability is, because you just saw it. So it's kind of like the information that you have available to you. If you see something and it's like kind of in front of you, you're going to put more weight on that in your decision-making process than it probably is rational to think about. So, so kind of the way this plays out in a work setting is, or one example of how it can play out in a work setting is if you're like a manager, and you get a lot of escalations all day. So let's say you work in a call center, you work in an operational area, or whatever. You're working on a, you're working in a technology, in like production support context, and the manager is getting escalations all day long, and that's kind of what they're dealing with. And I've actually done this study before. If you ask the manager how much of their team's time is spent on escalations, unless they have data, they're going to way overweight the amount of time that their team spends on escalations. So in this circumstance, you know, the manager would be like, well, I think about 20% of my team time is spent on escalations. There's actually like 5% of the time is spent on escalations. But what he sees all day is that 5% all the time. So he kind of overweights the natural tendency is to overweight that. So when you're looking at a value stream and you're trying to improve across a value stream, the way that I've seen this play out is that you're kind of looking down in your individual part of the process, and your ability to look at things in a systematic way and kind of pick your head up and understand things more systematically is a challenge for folks. And so that's kind of how one way that this availability heuristic plays out. So what we would do to correct against that is we would play this game. So when we would start working with people and thinking about how do we improve across a value stream, we would bring the team together, and we have maybe usually this is more of an in-person thing. So we'd be in a large room, and maybe we'd split into like 3 or 4 teams, and we'd give each team a puzzle, like a 25-piece puzzle, and we say, okay, here's the instructions. Everybody work as a team to complete the puzzle, and when you complete the assignment, let us know, and we'll record your time. So that's all the instructions we give. So what do you guys think happens? Everybody's got a puzzle at their table. There's 4 teams, or 4 groups. Every group has a table that they're at, and they each have a puzzle in front of them. Work as a team to complete the puzzle. And when you complete the assignment, let us know, and we'll record your time. So what do you think happens?
Everyone jumps into action.
Yep, everyone jumps into action. That's exactly right. And what are they concerned about?
Time. Speed.
Yeah,
Their
winning,
puzzle-
right?
Their puzzle piece and how it connects to everything else.
Right. They're like, heads down. We're gonna focus on what's in front of us, and we're gonna win this game. Like, so there's this like competitiveness that comes out immediately, right? So what they don't know is that what we have done is we took a couple pieces of each puzzle and put them in the box of the other teams. So every team has a couple extra pieces that are not part of their puzzle, and they have a couple missing pieces that are part of their puzzle. So everybody's like, you know, racing to do this, and then eventually, you know, one of the tables will kind of be like, we have some extra pieces, and then another table will be like, oh, we have some extra pieces, and we're missing a piece, and then kind of people start to realize that it's that in order for the puzzles to be completed, that everybody kind of has to work together, and then we would have a debrief, and the idea there obviously is that you need to pick your head up out of your specific point of reference of your table, and when you improve, you have to think about things systematically. You have to think about things as in the kind of larger context versus just write what's in front of you. And so we always have this great debrief, and I think people kind of come to this realization, oh yes, that makes a lot of sense, that we don't, you know, rather than just looking straight down, we have to kind of think bigger picture and think cross. All right, I'm going to stop for a second. Did that all make sense? Any questions before I move to our next example?
What does that?
Uh-oh, does someone's son have a question, or daughter? Oh, okay. Those are always the best questions. All right, so that was kind of just a little bit of an introduction into cognitive bias, but this is one that that one is a little more obscure. This one, I think will resonate with everybody, and maybe people have heard about this one. This is a very commonly discussed set of cognitive biases. There's actually two here. One is called status quo bias, and one is called loss aversion. Status quo bias, it's an emotional bias where it's basically that we have a preference for the current state. And we always take the current state as our baseline or status quo. We take that as our reference point, and any change from that baseline is perceived as a loss, okay? And the reason that's bad is because of loss aversion. Loss aversion refers to our tendency to prefer to avoid losses and to avoid them in the context of we avoid losses rather than equivalent gains. So it's thought that the pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. So this is a very important point, and one that's worth saying again, that the pain of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something. So I think this is something that we can all kind of resonate with in a business context, in a life context, that it's hard to move people off the status quo. And if something is in place and it's perceived as a loss, then it's really, really hard to change it, right? And so whenever you're trying to continuously improve, this is something that comes up every single time. That you've got something in place, there's an immovable barrier, and it's usually in people's heads that is really hard to get people off of. And there's a really great experiment about this with Duke basketball tickets. So for those of you who don't know, Duke is a university down in North Carolina. They have a fantastic basketball team. Usually, actually this year they're terrible, but usually they have one of the best basketball teams in the country. And they only have so many tickets for students, so they do a raffle, and they raffle off tickets for students. And so there's some Duke professors who did this great research study where after the raffle was done, they went out and they asked people who got the tickets, how much would you have to be paid in order to give up those tickets? And they asked people who did not get the tickets, how much would you pay to now get the tickets? Okay, so so on the one side, you have people who are gaining, the people who don't have the tickets. What would you pay for it? So they're the ones who are acquiring. And on the other hand, you have people who would be giving it up and would be losing it, and so they have to be compensated for that loss. So on the one side, the people who did not have the tickets would be willing to pay $170 on average to attend the game. So they never got the tickets, they didn't win the raffle, and they said, okay, we didn't win, but we would be willing to spend $170 per ticket to get those tickets. So what do you think the people on the other side said? So the people who got the tickets, how much would they have to be paid in order to give up those tickets? What do you guys think?
300.
Okay. Anybody else? You're in the right direction, Doug. It's higher.
Wow.
What's the rate for scalping tickets? Maybe matching that.
Yeah. Yep. Anybody else?
400.
Sorry?
400.
400. All right, keep going.
5.
5, no. $2,400.
No way.
Wow.
$2,400. So this is an amazing example of loss aversion, because once you have something, you have it in your head that I'm going to have this great experience at this basketball game, and in order to be willing to give that up, something that you have gained, it's a 14 times difference between people who are willing to pay the $170 and the having to be paid $2,400. So you can kind of see the difference between it. The day before, neither of them had tickets, so they both have that exact same perspective just the day before. Anyway, I thought it just totally fascinating study. We had, in a work context, we had this funny circumstance where I was working with some finance teams, and they had multiple redundant QA processes in place. And we were able to show them that they were totally redundant and added no extra value. And we're also able to show them that we were the only ones in the industry that do these redundant checks. That they're like, this is not standard practice. We are like an outlier in this space. So external example, and we were able to show them like with data that these add no value. What do you guys think happened when we showed them all that information? And I was talking to the CFO.
They didn't believe you.
They said, we don't care. We're going to keep them anyway. They're already in place, and I'm not going to give them up. And I think, what he said to me was, I'm the one who has to sign these. It's my I'm the one has to be concerned about going to jail. So we're keeping them. And it's just an example of and I'm sure you guys have all dealt with this many times. All right, so how do we deal with that? There's no easy way to deal with it, but the best thing that I have found is that we try to put people in the seat of a customer. So if we did a session, we would kick off the session with, tell us about a time you were delighted by a recent customer experience, just to kind of get them in that headspace. And then, sometimes maybe we would do like a persona map. Sometimes we would, if you can walk in the shoes of a customer, or if you can take a customer example, or if you can even find circumstances where you can actually be a customer of this process and kind of take yourself out of it and think about it less in the context of I'm the owner of this process, and really think about the owner as the customer. That at least gets people's kind of mind space thinking about things differently, and then you can kind of move them away from it being a loss to them or a loss to the company, and more about having it be a gain from a customer perspective. So there's a number of different exercises that we would do to kind of get us there, but and I'm sure you guys have had circumstances where you're trying to get people in the head of a customer. That's what I have found is the best way to get people over that status quo bias and loss aversion. All right, I'm just going to stop for a second. Any questions, thoughts? You guys willing to pay $2,400 for Duke tickets?
I would pay you to not make me go.
I was going to say nope.
All right. Well, we can all think about that in the context of if we got tickets to something that we were thrilled about going to.
Swimming with sharks.
Swimming with sharks. All right. Any questions before we move on to our next one?
I've worked in customer service in the past, and it's interesting when you work with the public and in that way, in retail or online, trying to understand what someone really wants. And that's something that we worked with people who are interacting with customers was sometimes you go back and forth, right? And if you just simply ask the question, what would you like? What are you trying to accomplish? Not, this was the worst experience ever, or, blah, blah, blah. I mean, sometimes people just want to vent, but when you actually ask somebody, would you like $2,400? Would that make you happy? Or, just trying to figure that out. Because sometimes people just say, I just want somebody to acknowledge that there was a problem, or, waive the $20 fee. And, it can be a 10-second conversation. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to. Customer behavior is, customers don't always know exactly. If you ask them, and Doug is the expert here, but often, they're not going to be able to tell you exactly what they want because they don't totally understand what they want down at the kind of at a deeper level.
And sometimes you have to give them options, do you want us to close your account, or do you want a refund, or do you want, here are some possibilities.
Right, right.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. We're only half an hour through our 4-hour session, so gotta speed things up here. All right, so next one is a fun one, which is picture superiority. And basically, picture superiority, I mean, I think this is like kind of intuitive to all of us, but we, the way that our brain works, we're much better at remembering pictures than we are at remembering kind of facts or data or words. And so if we just hear something or read some text, we're likely to remember about 10% of that 3 days later. Okay, so if we read something, if we read a memo, about, and we had someone kind of quiz us on it, we would remember about 10% of it 3 days later, or potentially less, based upon what I'm hearing on the line here. Whereas if we have a picture, our recall jumps to over 65%. And actually, there's this great study that was done where they had people sit down and watch 20. They flashed up pictures on a screen, 5 seconds for each picture, 2,500 pictures, and they just had people sit there through 2,500 pictures. And then 3 days later, they brought everybody in, and they showed 2 pictures side by side, and they asked everybody to identify which was the pictures you saw. So 2,500 pictures they went through. What do you guys think people were able to remember in terms of accuracy level?
80%.
Close.
75%,
Sorry?
75%.
No, wrong
I
direction.
was gonna say 85.
I was gonna say 85.
You guys are close. 90%.
90?
90%. So just think, I mean, isn't that just so crazy that we, how well we remember things? And there's this amazing book. Has anybody ever heard of the book Moonwalking with Einstein?
Heard of it.
Well, highly recommend it to anybody. But basically, it's this guy, Josh Foer, and he is a journalist, and he writes about, he got really interested in memory athletics, which is these people who are called memory athletes, and they have memory competitions where you have a deck of cards and you have to remember a random deck of cards, like what order the deck of cards is in, and people who can memorize these things the fastest kind of win. And then there's memorization of essays, and there's a bunch of other different contests that they do, and it's called memory athletics. And so he goes and he gets interested, and he starts talking to these people who are into it. And he asked them, so like, when did you guys learn that you have such great memories? And they're all like, we don't. We just, this is a totally studied thing. And when you're memorizing, the way that they would do it is they create what's called
Mind Palace.
Sorry, Mind
memory
Palace.
palace.
Is that?
Or
Mind
cognitive.
Palace is one
Mind
of them.
Palace, exactly. So they create a Mind Palace, and Mind Palace is basically this virtual house in your head, and they would they drop pictures along the way in this palace to remember things. So it's basically, you take a piece of data or a piece of text or a playing card, and out of that you create a picture, and you remember in your head what that picture is, and then that's how you memorize it. And that's basically because we're better remembering pictures. And anyway, this book is amazing, and he actually gets into memory athletics himself, and I won't ruin it, but highly recommend it to anybody. So the way that this plays out at work, and we've all had this circumstance, is when we talk about things in terms of like, this is going to be 50% better, or this is going to be, we're looking at things in a kind of an abstract way. We're going to gain, this, or we're going to, we're talking about things in this very kind of data-driven way. It really does not create that mental picture for people. And so people, it's not going to resonate with someone when you put out a memo saying, you know, this is the change that we're making and this is why it's great. They're only going to remember 5 or 10% of that memo or 5 or 10% of that talk, right? And so what we used to do to try and make it a little bit more concrete, to like try and get people into that future state, is we would do these exercises where we try and be very, very concrete about when you're improving, what does that future look like? And give me a picture and give me an example and try and make it very real for people. So that's one thing that we would do, is we would ask everybody to create kind of a change story that had very, very specific concrete examples that they could describe, that like, you know, talk about how does it feel or how does it look to be in that future state. So you're, rather than having this abstract sense of things are going to get better, that you actually have a picture in your head. And the other great way to do that is, if you can, go and see what good looks like. If you can see an example in person of what good looks like. So if you're talking about like like a very high performing agile team, if you can go sit in that team room and see what they do for a couple days and get that picture of high performance, it's going to be a totally, totally different thing than if we just talk about it conceptually, or we, you know, or we're going to a training class. Like, that experiential understanding and creating that picture or image on our head is just so much more, so much better of a way for us to learn and understand what things are going to look like.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
This brings to mind why I think, you know, as I've created training materials in the past, why having an image on the screen versus a whole bunch of words is so much more impactful. I didn't really realize that people would remember more of it. But for me, you know, imagery is so much stronger than text. You know, this sign here, you know, I don't know what else you put on the screen, but I remember the sign, and that I, you know, had some part of a new life coming, which was exciting. And so it really helps me think through, wow, you really have to have images in your training materials, because a whole bunch of words, only 10% of it would be remembered. Yikes.
Yeah. Yep.
And just to add, that's one of the, sorry, that's one of the reasons why, yeah, that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of short animated videos now, the ones that comes with the doodly kind of thing. One of those that Deb, you played, so it explains the content more easily, and people are able to remember more than just the words.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I do a lot of I have to do like a nightly update for the work that I do, where it's almost like a burn down. We're doing an implementation, and there's a number of open items that hadn't really started, in progress, and closed. And I just got to the point where I put up the graph and don't really have a lot of words around it, and people love it. And I don't have to like spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to put into my write-up. I just put out the graph and it tells a story.
Very nice. What else? Anybody else have any other questions or any other examples? All right, we're on to our last one. This is one of my favorites here. So it's the curse of knowledge. I just love that. It just kind of brings up this great mental imagery, the curse of knowledge, right? So basically, the curse of knowledge is this cognitive bias that occurs where we're communicating with each other. And it's basically that once you know something, it's very, very hard to put yourself into the mind of someone who does not know that thing. Okay, so I'm just going to say that again because it's a little complicated. But once you know something and understand something, it's very hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes and pretend that you don't know that thing. You know, so if you're trying to, so obviously the way that that plays itself out is when you're communicating, say if you've worked on something very deeply and you understand it very deeply and very well, and you're communicating it to someone, your expectation is immediately that that person probably knows it better than they actually do. So and again, it's a really interesting kind of conundrum to think about. And this is a slide that I love that kind of talks about it from my perspective. So we've got some leaders over here, and they're like, they're doing this big talk, and they're saying, "This is great. We knocked it out of the park. Oh my God, we're gonna have this huge impact on things." And then you've got, folks who are sitting in the audience, maybe on the front lines, maybe not the right way to say it, but people who are sitting in the audience and they're like, what, when's lunch? Oh, great, another initiative. And I think, again, I know we all talk about you have to communicate it 10 times for someone to get it. And, you need to make sure that you over communicate, and kind of repetition is important. But that's fine, and that's kind of something that we talk about to correct against this. But intuitively in our brains, our assumption is that people always know it better than they do. And so the experiment, that the seminal experiment that about this is actually, this is what we do. We do the experiment with a group when we're trying to make this point. So it's usually in the context of like change management or change leadership, and people are need to translate a change to their team, and just making sure that they kind of understand that this is an issue. And so we have everybody pair off. And again, if we were in a room together, I would have you guys do this with me. So we pair off. There's one tapper and there's one listener. Okay, and the tapper, their instructions are to tap a simple, well-known song by knocking on the table. So, okay, and the listener has to guess which song is being tapped out. Okay, so when this actual experiment was done, this actual research study was done, they asked the tappers, how often do you think the listeners are going to be able to get your song? And what do you think the answer was? Or I'm sorry, I guess it was like, yeah, do you think that the listener will be able to get your, get your song just by tapping it out?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, so they said 50% of the time they thought the listeners would get the song. Okay, so what percent of the time do you think they actually got the song?
5.
Yeah, with
Who is it? Was that
30.
Doug? Doug, you have good guesses.
5%, yeah.
Yeah. 3% of the time.
Oh, geez.
Only 3% of the time. And it's really fun to do. Actually, it causes like lots of kind of laughter, and it's fun because when you're the tapper, this is the thing. Like when you're the tapper, you've got that song kind of playing in your head, and you're like playing, and the listener just has this blank face, and you're like, why can't they get it? It's like, it's right here. It's in my head. I can hear it playing. I'm tapping it out, and you should be able to get this. So it's like you're kind of like projecting what you're hearing on the listener, and then the listeners are all just like. So the one thing you have to do if you ever do this is there are a couple songs you have to like keep out of there. You have to keep like Happy Birthday and like Jingle Bells. There's a couple, or there's a couple that people will get that are just like too basic. But anyway, it's a very fun thing to do, and it really makes the point very nicely that when you're communicating and when you have something in your head that you think that the person that you're communicating it to should understand it, and very rarely do they understand it at the same level you do. All right, So that's a fun one. I love that one. And we would always do that when we're thinking about making a change and translating it and trying to get people excited about this change. Just don't forget that you understand this change very well, but the people that you want to get on board do not understand it to that same level.
Did you guys want to try that as an exercise? I just thought of a song that I think I could do.
Yes.
All
Do
right,
it.
we'll do it. You guys
I
ready?
can name that in 5 taps.
Okay, here we go.
It was Morse code, right?
Nope,
Mary had a little lamb.
nope. And again, like I thought, oh, they'll definitely get this. That's what I was thinking.
In your head, you're
So
hearing
I can't
go
sing.
up
I
and
can't
down.
sing it, but I will like voice what it is.
New York, New York.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem to far
Oh.
away. Yeah, right. Beatles. Nope.
Nice.
And I'm
Nice.
sure everybody knows that song too.
Didn't hear that.
So it would be interesting to hum a song versus knocking, because you add so much more complexity to it. You know, if you sort of like play Name That Tune humming.
Well, humming, you get duration.
You get duration, but you also get the notes, you know, going up and down.
Intonation.
So, yeah, they represent the words to a certain extent, which is what most
Inflection.
people remember, except drummers. But
Yeah, that's funny. Who was that who just did that knocking? That was great.
That was Steve. And I was trying to pause in between too to give it a little bit of space, but you're right. There's no tone. There's no, yeah.
But it's funny how you think that people are going to get it, right? You're like, this is so simple. In your head, you're just like, you can hear the song, and anyway.
There's a picture in your head, but not
Right.
in there.
Right, exactly.
I
Right,
was surprised
knocking
that
the
you said that-
melody versus the rhythm is,
Yeah. I was surprised when you said only 50% of the people thought they'd get it. I'm thinking, oh, they'll definitely get this. Like 75, 80% of the time. But if it's only 5, there's a big difference there.
Yep. All right. So I have this on here. This is my last slide. And basically, we just had a little drop, in the bucket of all of these cognitive biases. This is just a way to visualize all the different biases, and you guys can see. Well, you can't see probably, but each one of these little lines here is a different cognitive bias that has been studied, and there's been research done about it, and then they kind of categorize all of them into different things, and there's a lot of them that I'm sure that you guys are aware of and have heard of, or at least conceptually know about. Like one of the ones when we were talking about this the other day that people were discussing was confirmation bias, which is when you have a particular kind of belief, you look for reinforcing things about that belief. And so it's hard to move people off of a particular mindset, because what they look for is not things that contradict it, but things that confirm it. So that's kind of our kind of one of our human tendencies. But so I love this topic. I think it's very relevant for all the work that we do, and just for working with anyone in general, at home or at work, and just fascinating to think about the way that our brain works, and sometimes how that can get in the way of working together. That's it. Did anybody know one of these that they particularly are interested in? I mean, you can't see them, I guess, but
I like the one I just read that says we store memories differently based on how they are experienced. The lesson that I keep in my head was you remember the information based on the environment that you learned it in.
Yep, absolutely.
I like the one that says, we're drawn to the details that confirm our own existing beliefs. I think that happens on a daily basis.
Oh yeah, yeah. That confirmation bias is in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the big categories. The one you guys are reading, and then all those little ones are all of the different types of specific biases that are in that category.
Is there one associated to output versus outcome?
Say a little bit more.
So when, I'm sure everyone's been affected by this, when someone comes to you and says, you get a ton of work, there's not really a lot of value, and it's all about output. Hey, my team's doing all this stuff. But when we look at value, we want to deliver outcome. So I'm trying to figure out what would the term be for that in this cognitive bias index.
That's a good question. I don't know.
What's a good answer?
Is it related? I was wondering if it's related to stay focused, we favor the immediate relatable thing in front of us, whereas output is an immediately relatable thing. Outcome might take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Good answer.
I will magnify this later and go through all of them.
The URL designhacks.co is the source. So one of the ways that I've heard people talk about overcoming some of this is to follow the learn, do, teach, and then you really fully understand something and know how to communicate it. Because you get feedback generally when you're teaching for how other people are perceiving what you're saying. So if you can effectively communicate it, then you truly understand it.
Yeah, that's great.
So me, it's names my whole life. Unless I work with a person or with them every day, I can't remember names. But music, I can remember music almost instantaneously. And everything else, I just work hard at to remember. Networking, we're in IT, most of us. Salesforce, Oracle, databases, all that. The more you do it, the more you know. I've given up on names. I figure I write them down as much as I can. But music, yeah, I was kind of kidding. I can name that tune in 6 notes. Most of the time I can. It's just kind of weird what you pick up automatically.
Great. All right. Any other comments or last questions before we wrap up?
Just a quick question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
If I this is very interesting. If I wanted to take the next step and read a book or read an article, is there anything that you would point us to do that?
Yeah, there's many places to go, but these ones are ones that I think are excellent. Probably I might start with Particularly Irrational is a really good one that's kind of focused on cognitive bias, and it has a lot of these types of studies in them and talks about the kind of the subtext here is the hidden forces that shape our decisions. But all of these are excellent. Hidden Brain is a good podcast. Freakonomics is a good podcast as well. So they're not all focused only on cognitive bias. They're focused on decision making in general, but cognitive bias is a big part of all of these. But Particularly Irrational focuses specifically on cognitive bias. There's also a really good book by Daniel Pink called Drive, which talks about human motivation, and that has a lot of the stuff in there as well, and just talks about what kind of motivates us as humans. It's another good one.
He's on Masterclass. If anyone wants to watch him on Masterclass, he does a great class.
that Daniel Pink you're talking about?
Yeah, he's brilliant. Also, what was the follow up to Freakonomics?
It was like Freakonomics 2 or something like, something
Oh, that's a
like
good
that.
one.
More Freakonomics or something like that.
That's
It's like
cheeky.
super Freakonomics.
Yeah, I didn't read it, but I liked it because I really loved Freakonomics.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good Freakonomics is a good podcast as well, and obviously Freakonomics is not only concerned with cognitive bias, but it does talk a lot about behavioral economics and behavior in general, and what kind of drives behavior, and how do we use data to understand behavior. So it's very related.
Do you mind if I throw one out there?
Of course.
Brain Rules by John Medina.
All right, I haven't read that.
He's from University of Washington, and it's 12 principles for surviving, thriving at work, home, and school, and goes over everything about the brain and how it interprets things. So when you're going through pictures, his theory, and he's supposedly one of the smartest men on the brain, is everything's a picture in your brain. So when you're looking at words, you already know what the letter T is a picture already imprinted on your brain. Thinking is a picture on your brain. Fast is a picture on your brain. And that's one of the reasons why we can go through it so quickly, is all the pictures are interlocked. He has kids, if you're going to school, to how to help them with school and learn quicker and faster and better.
Cool, that's great.
What was the name of that one, Sean?
Brain Rules.
Brain Rules. Okay, thank you.
MED.
The interesting thing once you start reading some of these books is a lot of the studies are very overlapping. So there's a lot of similarity that you'll find in a lot of these, but there's an endless number of books that are both just generally about decision making, business decision making in the context of business circumstances. So lots of different options out there. All right.
In chat, a book called Humankind came out recently. Very interesting. Takes apart some historical stories where people think the worst, and the reality is quite different. Like Lord of the Flies, the reality of a true story is almost the opposite. Kids stranded on an island totally cooperate with each other, try and save each other. So,
don't we all think?
All right, my hour is up, so I don't want to take us too much further than an hour.
You have 3 more hours.
Yeah, 3 more hours. What's up with that?
All right.
A lot more on that picture.
That's right.
We need to go over. All right. Did you have any other questions? I don't want to. I mean, we are at the hour, but not to cut it short.
Yeah, I'll ask a question. A lot of things lately have been about psychological safety. In fact, the whole last week I've been in a bunch of them. Just wondering what you think about applying this, some of these to psychological safety, and where the impact or the support, for another word, would be for, it's hard. Actually, it's hard to explain. But looking at that graph, I thought that really nailed me on psychological safety. Do you have any ideas? This is kind of thrown out really to anybody.
Yeah, that's a great point. Nothing. I certainly, when you're thinking about psychological safety in general and team performance and kind of how can you create high performing teams? I think these definitely come into play, and they probably all come into play in different ways because it has to do with how we relate to each other, how we relate to the information that's coming out, how we relate to what's expected of us. So there's probably a lot of different things that relate to that. Nothing is coming to mind in terms of a specific example or circumstance, but I welcome anybody else to jump in if you have anything.
Oh, actually, I just saw that Occam's razor. Why would that be here?
Hey, where is that?
Left-hand side, green, the top green one. So it's the second down from less is better effect.
I don't know. Does anybody have a thought on why that's in here?
Maybe it's not always true.
Yeah.
It's just an assumption.
Okay. I always shave with his razor all the time. But there's no rhyme or reason to it.
The simplest looking option to me is the world is flat.
Well, it is. Didn't you know that?
Yeah, well, I do, So these other people have a cognitive bias that it's round for some reason.
It's the same as our brains. They're all flat too.
Getting flatter every year.
Well, that was great. Really appreciate the session.
Yeah, thank you guys for participating and listening. I appreciate the time, and hopefully you can take a couple tidbits away. I'm always happy to continue the conversation offline as well. So appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Chris. This was great. So for next month, we are meeting on April 20th, and we are hearing from Bob Fisher, the Director of Agile Delivery and Training with Allianson. He's going to be talking about the business model canvas, a collaborative method for building product alignment and uncovering critical assumptions. So that's a wrap for today. I'm going to